Instead of identifying with our Buddha nature, with our true nature, with our luminous, blissful, empty nature, a lot of us identify with our, deficient self, what we're not. Feeding your demons helps us to heal kind of like the original wound of ignorance in Buddhism, which is identifying with the wrong thing, identifying with the wrong part of our identity.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today my guest is Chandra Easton, a senior Dharma teacher, author, and translator of Tibetan Buddhist texts, renowned for her efforts to elevate the empowered feminine in Buddhism. Chandra has a deep lineage of study under the guidance of prominent Tibetan and Western Buddhist teachers, beginning her journey in Buddhist practice at the age of 4. She spent decades bridging traditional Tibetan teachings with a modern approach, making profound wisdom practices accessible and relevant for today's world. We spoke together live at Esalen this fall, where we explored her latest book, Embodying Tara, 21 Manifestations to Awaken Your Innate Wisdom, as well as themes of ego, suffering, and the transformative practice known as Feed Your Demons.
Chandra, I wanted to start off the evening by posing to you the question, what do you feel grateful for this evening? And I will join you as well.
Well, I feel grateful to Esalen for having me back year after year. It's just such a gift to be here. I love it here. And I feel grateful to the whales who are just breaching out there. How many people saw the whales breaching? I mean, some big ones just happened. Nature and the delicious food and all the elements that come together to create this beautiful place in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I feel grateful. Wow. I feel so grateful that I can be in a place where there's peace and I'm fed 3 meals a day, get to walk this land with so many curious and open-hearted individuals. And I've just been so lucky to kind of fall into this path of being aligned with Esalen. I came here 10 years ago. I came here 14 years ago through the Work Scholar program and just started working here 10 years ago. And it was happenstance, a lucky kind of happenstance that brought me here in connection with the path of human potential. And I just couldn't feel luckier. So Chandra, selfishly, I'm not in your course, and I understand that you're pursuing a practice called Feed Your Demons. And I was wondering if you could just break it down for me. What is Feed Your Demons? How does that fit in with Buddhism?
I just gave that talk a couple hours ago. It's day 3 of the retreat. And I usually don't spring this Feeding Your Demons on folks until a couple days in. It's a really wonderful practice. It's really a personal practice in terms of being a personal process where one can meet and dialogue with and then feed instead of fight our so-called challenges called demons. But that's because this practice is rooted in traditional Buddhist thought. It was founded by, Feeding Your Demons was founded by my teacher, Lama Tsotra Malioni, who's a Western woman who had become a Tibetan Buddhist nun back in the 60s with the Karmapa, His Holiness the Karmapa, and was a nun for about 4 years, then derobed, had a family, lived in the world, eventually became a Dharma teacher and began teaching a very beautiful practice under the guidance of her teacher at the time, Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, a Dzogchen Great Perfection teacher in the Tibetan tradition. And this practice is called Chud. How many people know of Chud? Has anybody heard of this? It's some people, few. There's always maybe 1 or 2, or now you guys hadn't heard of it before. So it's a combination of Tibetan shamanic practices, rooted in the Bön tradition, which is the animist, indigenous religious tradition of Tibet, blended with traditional Buddhist philosophy practice from India, from Mother India, that came up in the 8th, 6th, 7th, then really was rooted in Tibet in the 8th century CE. And Machi Glabdran is the founder's name of the Chud practice. And she was a woman, of course, and lived in the 11th century. So she founded this incredible practice, this blend of the shamanic tradition mixed with Mahayana thought and practice based on the Prajnaparamita Sutras. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but this is like the most important teaching since the Buddha himself. It happened about 500 years after the death of the Buddha. Around the turn of the millennia in India arose this beautiful universalist movement called the Mahayana, the great vehicle. Robert Thurman, who many of you may know, wonderful scholar, practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, translates as the universal vehicle, a practice that was very much focused on working for the welfare of all beings, right? So this generous aspiration to wake up to achieve the ultimate human potential, awakening in this life, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. And so Machi Labdran had her own development and realization herself, and then also combined it with the indigenous tradition, and so created Chud. Okay, so now fast forward, my teacher, Lama Tsultrim Malioni, who's learned this practice. It's chanted with a bell and a drum. Has haunting, beautiful melodies, a double-sided, large, like shaman's drum that's held in the right hand and played to like the heart, the beat of the heart rhythm, and then held in the left hand with the bell, and it's played, these two instruments are played in synchronicity together, different patterns, different beats, and liturgies and prayers are sung to these melodies, and they're all like singing about blessing the earth, blessing the spirits of the earth, but also praying for healing and liberation and peace for oneself and others. It's also a healing ceremony. So Lama Tsultrim taught this to Westerners and found after a while that some were benefiting from it, but a lot of folks weren't really benefiting from the potency of the gestalt of it, which is pretty cathartic. And I went into detail about it in class today. I don't know if I'll go through all the gory details because it's like you undergo your own death. Shamanic death, not literal. You visualize sort of the dismemberment and then the rememberment, like a shaman in many different traditions learns to undergo their own kind of metaphoric death and then heal and remember themselves as a medicine man or woman or person. And so we do that through visualization and prayer in every sitting of the Chud practice. It's very cool. Okay, so feeding your demons was kind of like, whoa, Chud was like, whoa, way over your head for a lot of people, and it was sung in Tibetan. So Lama Tsultrim, my teacher, said, maybe we could update this a little bit for people. And so she had studied Western psychology, Jungian psychology, but also Gestalt and empty chair therapy. And I know Gestalt's very important for Esalen and was developed here in large part. And so she blended Gestalt empty chair therapeutic methods with this Tibetan Buddhist practice called Chud, or severance. That's how you would translate Chud, which means to sever. What are we severing? We're severing our attachment onto the ego, attachment onto the separate sense of self. We're not like cutting up the ego. We're severing, or we're cutting the clinging, the fixation, the grasping onto this idea of Chandra or Samuel as being this solidly existing little unified, homunculoid walking through the world, but really we're a configuration of all sorts of causes and conditions and different factors that make us who we are in this moment, but we're ever changing and interdependent. And we come into being because of the 5 elements, because of our parents, because of what they've given us and what the world and our ancestors have given us, and our karmic ancestry as well, if you believe in that kind of stuff. Yeah, feeding your demons helps us to heal kind of like the original wound of ignorance in Buddhism, which is identifying with the wrong thing, identifying with the wrong part of our identity. Instead of identifying with our Buddha nature, with our true nature, with our luminous, blissful, empty nature, a lot of us identify with our, deficient self, what we're not, or what our parents told us we were, we seem to think we are based on, who we are in our culture and our family and our religion and all of this.
It kind of makes me think about when I heard about this for the first time, it made me think about internal family systems, that conception of parts. And I was wondering, talk to me about that.
I'm not that deep in IFS, internal family systems. I've heard a lot about it. I have friends and colleagues who are licensed therapists who integrate that and who are also certified in feeding your demons. And they say they're very conducive, very parallel to each other, intersect in a lot of interesting ways. And it's true. It's like demons are parts of ourselves. Like that's what I often say. I think I learned it from Lama Tsultrim. She says basically in feeding your demons, we are dialoguing with fragmented aspects of ourselves. So fragmented parts, unintegrated parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I've done IFS a couple times. And it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And it felt very familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And Lama Tsultrim actually does her own Facebook Live that they turn into a podcast. So it's not really a podcast. But she did interview Richard Schwartz. Mm-hmm. And it was such a fun show because they agreed ahead of time to do this. I think she went first. She guided Richard, the founder of IFS, in a process of feeding your demons. And then he turned the tables and guided Lama Tsultrim in front of everybody in a process with IFS. And they were so vulnerable and transparent about, like, I think Richard talked about an issue that had been going on with him and his wife, but it was very relatable and educational and beautiful and sweet. But I would search that because it's an interesting episode.
Great.
It's called Lama Live.
Can you talk about the role of compassion and self-compassion in this practice?
Yeah, we can't just say be compassionate for yourself, Sometimes that can work, but other times we need to have help or tools to approaching that, especially when we are coming up against aspects of ourselves that we don't like or that we wish would go away. And that is what's so cool about feeding your demons is it's turning the tables on the old paradigm of like combating the parts of ourselves that we don't like the Herculean myth of fighting with the Hydra. Hercules, one of his big tasks was to go and kill this big monster Hydra. And he went there and he found the Hydra and he started trying to hack off, the Hydra is this kind of being with one big body and then multiple arms and legs and heads. And he's chopping off the heads and the arms and the legs, but the Hydra just won't die. He keeps thinking it's dead and then it pops back up until finally the story goes that he finds this giant boulder and rolls the boulder over the Hydra and squishes it under the thing. But what Lama Tsultrim, she tells the story in her book called Feeding Your Demons. It's such an unsatisfying ending to the story because that the Hydra is going to kind of wiggle out from under the boulder at some point. He didn't really deal with the problem. And so what she says is that our demons can be like hydras sometimes. We can have a core wound, maybe something that happened as a child, that then has all these offshoots, like compensatory behaviors that we develop over time. So say maybe we felt abandoned by our parents, maybe we went through divorce or something like that. And then maybe because of that, we have an abandonment issue or wound. And that can become like a hydra, like a core of the hydra, where we have an abandonment demon, you could say. And then based on that, then you can have all these compensatory behaviors, like maybe in order to not be abandoned again, you won't let yourself fully fall in love. You won't surrender yourself. Or maybe you numb out with alcohol or other behaviors so that you don't have to feel certain things. You see what I mean? So all of those types of behaviors would be like the arms and the heads of the hydra. And so in feeding your demons with compassion, we can start to understand these different aspects of our, you could say, cosmology or kind of tapestry, a body map, you could say, of who we are, and work from the outside in towards the core of the hydra or from the inside out. So you can go right to the core of the abandonment demon and work that for a while. And through extension, that might naturally just pacify those compensatory behaviors. Or in the opposite way, you could maybe start working with one of the arms and the legs, like, oh, I can't seem to give myself over to love, right? So work on that for a while. And then that can help get you more compassionately able to approach the core wound. And so you can work both sides towards the middle, in and out, out and in. Yeah. And so in the training, if you wanted to become a facilitator of feeding your demons, you would learn to work with hydras, map them out, you do body maps, like where different demons live in your body. We do these thing where we lie down on a big sheet of like newspaper print and draw your partner would outline your whole body as you're lying there. And then you take all the demons you've been working on during the training and you bring them and you map them out like, oh yeah. And then you get to see where they are in your body. So all of this helps us to have more compassion for ourselves and understanding. Because when we start to turn towards that which we normally would turn away from and fight against, we start to understand ourselves better. And I was talking about this today in the class when I introduced Feeding Your Demons to the folks in the retreat, which is that in the beginning we think the demons, because it's called a demon, is going to be this big, ugly, horrible monster. Like when we're going through the 5 steps, we're visualizing, we're letting the imagery, we don't actively visualize, but we're letting the subconscious offer communicate to us through imagery. It's different, right? And so the imagery that arises, sometimes the demon will look like a big, scary, hungry ghost or monster. But other times, and very often I've been doing this for about 15 years, guiding clients, groups, trainings, personally. Very often what I see is that the demon that appears is actually like, I used an example of one of my demons is I had an anxiety demon I was working on for a while. It's like this nervous feeling in my stomach for a while. Sometimes it'd be in my heart or in my throat. So every day, whenever I'd check in on it while I was doing the training, you have to feed a certain amount of demons to get your certification. But it was very fuzzy. And I remember when I first did it, and anxiety, it was new for me. I hadn't had anxiety at that point in my life. It was mid-30s. I guess I was pretty lucky. The demon, the image that appeared with this anxiety demon was Fozzie the Bear from the Muppet Show, which is kind of the Muppet movie, which is kind of the play on words because it's like the fuzziness I was feeling in the anxiety felt fuzzy, nervous. And so it wasn't a goblin or a ghoul or an ugly looking thing. It was actually kind of this cute, frazzled looking Fozzie the Bear. I mean, if you know what Fozzie the Bear, who knows what Fozzie the Bear looks like? If you don't know what Fozzie the Bear looks like, please Google it at some point because he is a very cute Muppet figure. So he's a cute guy and he's lovable. And so it was a frazzled Fozzie the Bear, disheveled and funny. So it made me chuckle. I remember I kind of laughed when I saw this demon appear to me. It's like, you're not a demon. You don't have fangs or something. So through that comes more self-compassion of like, oh, and then it has some messages to give me. Then I get to embody because you switch places and become the demon. And you get to speak as the demon at a certain point in the process. And so that helps to cultivate more compassion, right? The people who are in the room, you just did this. Do you feel like you got to experience a bit more self-care and compassion for yourself when you got to actually see the demon and then be it and speak from that vantage point? It's cathartic. Yeah? I'm getting nods. The podcasters aren't seeing the nods, but the nods are happening. Then we get to meet the ally too, because we feed the demon to complete satisfaction. That's why it's called feeding your demon. You feed the demon what it would feel when it got what it really deeply needed. And then you feed it to complete satisfaction. And then that knotted up demon energy gets to be liberated and manifest as the ally. So then you see the ally. And then you get to embody the ally and speak as the ally. So you get to be your demon and you get to be your ally. So you get to see you are both. And ultimately through practice, you begin to see that you really, when you are in your center, when you are really in your power, you are your greatest ally.
me, it sounds like you're working towards, maybe this vocabulary is from sort of a different paradigm, but you're working towards a more integrated self. And I'm wondering how that works with Buddhist conceptions around non-self or the illusory nature of the self. How do we reconcile that?
Yes, we are working towards an integrative self, a healthy sense of self, self-love, self-compassion. That's very important. And then eventually we also want to understand that we are not just this notion of self. I mean, the Buddha taught non-self. It was very revolutionary back in the day. I mean, that's why he said, what I teach is against the stream. The main consensus at the time was that Atman in India, the idea of Atman as the soul, is this kind of self that goes from life to life to life to life. And what the Buddha said is when he achieved liberation under the Bodhi tree, is he saw that this thing that we think is a self actually doesn't exist in the same way we assume it does. And it feels like it's an entity that goes from one life to the next, or is continuity of consciousness. Yes, there is continuity of consciousness, but that's a whole other function of Buddhist psychology. Could explain that in a longer podcast. But that we are, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, the confluence of many rivers coming together to create a temporary larger river while we're in this body, in this form. But when you really investigate under deep vipassana, clear deep seeing, which is what vipassana means, deep seeing or insight, there is no real core kernel of a self here under deeper investigation. There is no solid existing self here, and yet we are appearing. We are here. Chandra is talking. You are listening. Samuel's the one holding the mic, asking the questions. Yes, he is him. I am me. We are separate, right? So nobody's refuting that. So what Buddhists would say is on a relative level, there are separate selves. There are individuals. The floor is solid because we're walking and sitting on it. But on an ultimate or absolute level, or maybe even on a quantum level, you could say when you really look into things, there's infinite space between all of ourselves. It's quite phenomenal. We are 99.99% space in our body between the cells. So we're not what we appear. And on an ultimate level, we exist, but we exist empty of intrinsic existence. It's important to have a healthy sense of self. So that then you can be like, and then non-self doesn't scare me because I know that I am consciousness that's beyond self, beyond birth, death. Or Buddha taught Buddha nature, which is this kind of potential. It is not kind of, it is the seed or the womb of awakening that we all beings, all sentient beings have within us. That's why he taught non-harming, non-violence, and not eating meat if you can help it. Now, he was not a vegetarian, by the way, because he would go on alms and beg. And his teaching was to just take what you receive, whatever's given to you. And he actually died of bad pork. Did you know that? Isn't that a bummer? I mean, he was old by then. I mean, he's not like Jesus who only taught for a few years. Like Buddha taught for how many years? 44? Do you know? 44? Something like that. Long, 50 years, almost 50 years. Long teaching career.
What do you want for your students when you think about, I just think about all of us grappling with our identities within this world in terms of trying to establish yourself as, a person in a career or a person within a family constellation. Even sometimes people talk about themselves as brands in these days. What do you want for your students when it comes to grappling with constructs of self and grappling with ego?
That's a great question. Wow. What do I want for my students? I want to help people be happy. Honestly, I really do. I love what I do because I get to try to do that and to try to bring more joy and healing and wholeness with the tools that I have found benefited me in my life. And so I would want that for them. But then, of course, why not do that on the way to full fun, full liberation, and for me, okay, we all have our own paths. I do not think that Buddhism's the only way. I am very ecumenical and I love the world's traditions. And I know that there are many roads leading to the top of the mountain. I mean, I was a religious studies major in college and grad school. So I have studied the world's religions and I love all of it. And yet for me, I have strong karma with Buddhism. It rings true to me. And so I love teaching it and I love sharing it. And so what I would want for my students is to go deep into it and test it out for themselves and practice it, and to not just pay, like my teachers have said, and my teachers' teachers have said, don't pay lip service to the teachings, but put them into practice. The Tibetan is katsan siksan mayimpa. Don't pay lip service to the teachings. Put them into practice and test for yourself to see if they ring true to you, see if they work for you. And that's what I would want. And if they don't, then move on to something else. But if they do, then keep going and bring them to fruition, you know. You know, in the past, the women we got a short end of the stick with Buddhism, just like in all aspects of culture within the last 5,000 years. And so it's time for women to put, you know, to bring teachings like this and other things to fruition so that we can be leaders and teachers and help people, not just women, of the future. And I'm really committed to that, as you know. I'm definitely feminist, and I'm not ashamed to say it, but I love men, and I love gender nonconforming and all of it. My eldest child, born a girl, but is non-binary, 24 years old, Tara. And they've been my teacher around all of that. And when they started to identify in that way and asked me to refer to them as they, them, and explain to me why that was important to them, it took, of course, some time to get used to those pronouns, but I said, this is so Buddhist, because Buddhism's about breaking free of constructs, conceptual constructs, cultural constructs. I mean, even the Buddha said, you know, the caste system is a cultural construct, let alone ego, selfhood, and even God. I mean, he said there's no God. Or he kind of left that as an open question. He chose to be silent. Which is sort of like, some people say he said no God. But yeah, I would want my students to be questioning and put it into practice so that they really bring the teachings to fruition.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. Can you share a little bit more about, you know, kind of insights around how a feminist ethos can emerge in the practice of Buddhism?
I think there's plenty of room for it. There's some tender points when you look at the life story of the Buddha, but there are also some highlights as well. So there's some scarring there. There's a little trauma, like, God, I'm a woman and I love Buddhism, but when I read some of these sutras or the life story of the Buddha actually as well, there's a little bit of a dissonance there. Mm-hmm. And so there should be, I think, also questioning and challenging now even these beautiful traditions. There is room for it because ultimately gender is a construct, and on an ultimate level, there is like Buddha Tara, you know, the female Buddha of compassion, when she, in a distant eon, long, long ago, this is in my book, and this is something that's very commonly told when talking about this wonderful story of the female Buddha of compassion, Arya Tara. How many people know Arya Tara, the female Buddha, like green Tara? Yeah. But there are white Taras, red Taras, blue Taras, golden Taras, and so on. 21 Taras, and then there are Taras as infinite as the sky. So there's all sorts of wonderful things about her. But her origin story says that she was a princess in a distant eon named Princess Wisdom Moon. And in a world system before this world system, there was a different Buddha. You know, there have been many different Buddhas. Buddha Shakyamuni was the Buddha in this system. And so in a prior world system, there was a Buddha named the drum sound Buddha, Dum-Dum-Svara Buddha. In any case, so we have this princess, Wisdom Moon, who developed the aspiration to take what's called the Bodhisattva vow, which is, she was a Dharma practitioner, very devoted to Drum Sound Buddha and his teachings, but there's a stage in development where you feel like, okay, my own liberation isn't enough. I want to work for the welfare of others as well. And that's what the Bodhisattva vow is about, is this aspiration to awaken for the benefit of all beings, not just myself. And so she went to the abbot of the local, of the monastery of the Drum Sound Buddha, and she said, I'm ready. I would like to take the Bodhisattva vow. And the abbot said, oh, this is very good. Wonderful that you have this aspiration. But first you should pray to be reborn as a man, because you will benefit many more beings as a man. And there's also this idea in the early sutras that says that women, or people born in female gender, need to either be reborn as a man in order to attain liberation, or go through what's called a sexual change. They don't call it a sex change. In the sutras, like even the Prajnaparamita Sutra, women need to go through a sexual change through realizing emptiness. They can actually change their gender. Crazy. When he said that to her, she, being the badass she said, here there is no man, there is no woman. There is no self, there is no person, there is no consciousness. Such dualistic labels are for the small-minded, or sometimes the translation is the evil-minded. And because, something I'm paraphrasing now, is like, because no one essentially is vowing or praying to be reborn, to be enlightened as a woman, I, from here on out, vow to be reborn again and again in a woman's body so that I can benefit beings in a woman's body. And that was her commitment, and that was her vow. And the story goes, Drum Sound Buddha overheard this, gave her the Bodhisattva vow, and then she achieved the different levels of realization, and she attained Bodhisattvahood and then Buddhahood, and that she is continually abiding in a state of samadhi, of meditative absorption, called continually saving all beings. And so I love that story, because when we tap into her mantra is Om Tari Tutari Ture Svaha. Yeah, Om Tari Tutari Ture Svaha. When we chant her mantra, when we think of her, we can, or we maybe don't even have to think of her. We can feel that she is continually radiating like the rays of the sun, loving kindness, compassion, protection, benevolence, because that is her, and that's how she got her name Tara, because Tara means the savioress, but Tara also means star. So she is limitless like the stars in the sky, in the sense, the way she manifests for all beings, to benefit beings. A lot of historians that I've studied more recently say, like Buddhist historians, and translators say, a lot of the kind of the more of the misogynistic language that you see in some of the earlier sutras, like what I just quoted, may have been inserted by the monastics who were in charge of reproducing and retranscribing these oral teachings and editing these texts. And so you get a lot of more of the cultural baggage, those cultural norms that were put in. And so they're not ready, scholars are not ready to say the Buddha said things like women can't be enlightened. Like, he never said that. He was hesitant to ordain women as nuns for quite a while. And when pressed on it, he said it was not because women couldn't attain liberation. I mean, that's in his own teaching, his own words, but because he was worried that the monks would be tempted if the nuns were around. And that because of that, the Dharma would get diluted, and that within 500 years' time it would be diluted. But it's still around, and it's still benefiting many beings. He eventually changed his mind. It said he changed his disciple Ananda, his attendant, is the one who pressed him on that and said, come on, step it up. If women can attain liberation, then why won't you let them walk the path fully like you are the men? And he's finally said, okay, I changed my mind. I'll let them now. And he started ordaining women. Now, there were a lot more vows and rules for women that are pretty nuts. The youngest of the youngest novice monks, even to this day in many cultures, in Tibet, when I lived in Dharamsala, where Tibetan refugee settlement is, His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives, when I'd go to the temple for teachings, all the young novice monks were all sitting in front as the elder monks, the senior monks, and the novice monks. Little 5-year-old monks were sitting in front, and then it was the nuns, the elder nuns, everybody. It's like the nuns had to always sort of take second backseat to the monks. And then there were a lot of other rules. Pretty crazy, but you could see it everywhere. The Dalai Lama's changed that now. It's more even. He's trying to create more equality for women in his culture. What's interesting is though in Tibetan culture, like in the Tibetan government, there was pretty much I think it was 50-50 representation of women and men in Tibetan government. So feminism was very strong and is very strong within Tibetan culture in more of the lay world and within politics. But when religious institutions do not want to let go of their power, so it was the last place to change.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you about power. This is a politics question. So, and it's around Buddhism and acceptance. So we have this election in November that's looming kind of large, with a lot of us feeling uncertainty and fear about its outcome. And I know in Buddhism, there's a strong emphasis on equanimity, in the face of change. So I just want to ask, how can Buddhist teachings guide us in accepting whatever fate happens, while still at the same time remaining engaged, remaining compassionate, remaining active?
Well, yeah, that's also very important. And one of my favorite teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, was a big pioneer and engaged Buddhism and on many levels. And it's important. And a lot of people think, Buddhism's just sitting back on the mountain or in the temple and not being engaged. But we need to be engaged. Dharma means a lot of different things. Like, of course, we think of Buddhism, a lot of us, when we talk about Dharma, but Dharma can also be Hindu tradition, Jain tradition. In the Vedas, the word Dharma existed also. And when you see Dharma with a little d instead of a capital D, you can also understand it meaning like phenomena, reality, truth. But it can also mean your destiny, like what your work is in the world, like what is my dharma, fate. But also, dharma also means justice and righteousness. What is just? And so I think politics and justice, work, racial justice, social justice, environmental justice, gender justice, all of the justices have plenty of room within Buddha Dharma and other forms of Dharma probably too, because we need to work for the welfare of all beings. Like if we do take this vow, or even within our heart, say, I want to wake up, not just so that I can be happy, but so I can help benefit others through my well-being and my work and who I am as a human being or a parent, for example, then we need to see the interrelated truth of our actions, our words, and how they affect the world. And we can't just isolate ourselves and think that I can meditate over here. And if, I was going to say, I don't want to name sides, but like if somebody wins the election and somebody else loses the election, that it doesn't matter because it's all a dream or it's all an illusion or, it's all empty of intrinsic existence. I mean, we could go way into nihilism there. And the Buddha said his path was walking the middle path between the two extremes, between nihilism, like nothing matters on the one side, and then eternalism, which is like everything is permanent and solidly existing and never changing on the other side. Those were the two kind of extremes. So he calls the middle way, the middle path. Another earlier interpretation is the middle path between the two extremes of craving and aversion, or attachment and aversion. So I think that we need to stay engaged. We need to do everything we can to help make our world a better place, whatever that is. We all have different capacities in what we can do. But I like to tell my students that we should think about 50-50. 50% on the cushion, doing a practice, cultivating your inner restoration, rest and renewal, but then also get out there and be engaged and help people in whatever way you can. Some people can't get out there. Some people could maybe donate money or make phone calls or write postcards and do other things, but other people can get it through their actual work can benefit people. So I talk about this a lot in my book. I think a lot about justice. I've done a lot of my own anti-racist work, and I think anti-racist work is very important, and that is very much aligned within Buddhist thought. Gender justice, of course, we've already talked about that, but environmental justice, everything is interdependent. We're not alone here. We need to do that. I've had, since my book has come out, I've had a couple haters say, because I've talked about justice a lot in my book, and I give examples of real life women who embody the 21 Taras, right? And a lot of them are justice women. A lot of them are women who are working for the welfare of the world. And a couple people have said, I was just ready to enjoy this book, but politics have no place in Dharma, in a Dharma book. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is such the problem of our small, limited perception of Western idea of what Dharma is and what it isn't and what it should and shouldn't be. Like, these people don't know. They don't know. The Buddha was a justice guy. He went against the grain. He went against the stream. He went against the caste system. I mean, Jesus, maybe I should just stop there. Angela Davis said, mindfulness can show us how to restore when we've been out there on the front lines working for justice. But it can also show us where there's still work to be done.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the crowd, and we can have a little Q&A. I just think about the sources of my own pain, and I'm so sure that most of them are this egoic attachments that I have. And I just want to pose this question to you, since you've done probably more work in this area than I have. Can you talk to me about a way that your life has benefited from internal work that you've done through your Buddhist practices around ego?
Taking myself less seriously. I think not being so attached to perception of other people's perception of me or my perception of myself has helped me have more humor and spaciousness and more joy and fun and creativity. I think that's been really important. It's like holding things more lightly.
I mean, you just to push a little bit, I mean, you are kind of a public figure. You're an author as well as a teacher. And so you're kind of put into the position where people are going to look up to you and, people are going to enjoy your work and might praise you a little bit more. And I'm just wondering, does that make it more challenging to work with the practice of non-attachment regarding ego?
I think it could. I think it does for some. I don't know if it has for me, but maybe that's an egoic thing. I think I say that because I came from such the other side of low self-esteem and not valuing myself, so like to write a book was really scary, and I was a very shy child, and it took a lot for me to learn how to feel comfortable talking in front of people. And so, I've definitely got some ego stuff. And one of my teachers said that a teacher that told her once, she went in there and said, what do I do with praise when a student praises me, for example? Mm-hmm. And this Zen teacher said to her, you can take it and hold on to it, but just for 2 minutes and then let it go. I thought that was so great. It was so brilliant. And I've never forgotten that. And I think it's good. It's maybe something I try to do. But I think as a teacher, there's also the other thing. It's like, in my training, whether it was yoga teacher training, which I did, or Dharma teacher training, we trained a lot on checking that ego. Like therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists have to learn about transference, people seeing you as their parent, or putting you up on a pedestal, that a lot of that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so how to recognize that and how not to let that inflate the ego. It's not always easy to see, but hopefully we have friends around us who will slap us down a notch or two, or like be honest with us if they see us getting our egos bloated up. But, Dharma is about being humble. Dharma is about humility. And I feel like when I look at my life and the times when I felt in harmony and happy with myself and good about myself, self is when I've been humble, really humble, and not been so insecure that I felt like I needed to get the kudos and get the thing. But there's a kind of a confidence that has to come in order to have some of that grounded humility. So it's an interesting path to feel healthy and whole and good about yourself in order to feel an authentic humility too, because we don't want to have false humility. We don't want to bypass, a healthy sense of self in order to fake some kind of humility, because that's bullshit. It's kind of like obliterating the self before the self is healthy, right? Like dissolving, going non-self too early. And I've seen that. I grew up around Dharma, and I saw a lot of people kind of do that. Kind of one way to spiritually bypass. We could do that. So we have to be careful about that.
Any questions?
Yeah, so I struggle a little bit with the term demon. I have a past in Christianity, and even at this day in evangelical churches, the way they deal with demons, I'm not so convinced about it. The whole concept that the demons are different from us. I learned Gestalt here 40 years ago. That ages me. From one of the founders of the Institute, Dick Price, and the way you describe the work, it reminds me very much of the empty chair work, and I think there's a reason why modern psychology stays away from that term demon, and now you reintroduce it, and you might have excellent reasons. I just like to learn about it, because on first view, there are reasons why we kind of, unless you're very evangelical, which I don't think you are, we distance ourselves a little bit from that concept. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Yeah, we could have, I didn't name this practice. That was my teacher who did. And demons definitely have different meaning than in Christianity. In Buddhism, and the Buddha taught that demons are not external entities out there, but they are these aspects of ourselves, projections of the mind, that then we reify as something real, or things that obstruct our experience of freedom. It could be thoughts, emotions, even physical illness. All of these can be worked with in the 5 steps of feeding your demons. But my teacher, Lama Tsultrim, thought about not calling it feeding your demons, because she knew that this could be a block for people. And it's true that a lot of people with Christian backgrounds who either are like recovering Catholics or, not so much Christian anymore, but were, or really are still, might have problems with the name, feeding your demon. And I'm sure it's still true. When we did the pilot studies, did a couple pilot studies of feeding your demons. The scientists, we did have serious discussions about like maybe changing the name. People were like, feeding your dragons. So Tsultrim just threw up her arms and said, we're just going to keep it. I like to call it FYD. Mm-hmm. FYD. Feeding your demons. FYD. If you say it, it's kind of like feed. But nobody, some people are going there, but I kind of like it. You like it?
Like it.
What's interesting, if we look at the etymology or the history of the word demon, it's very interesting. You do know this. I think did you come in a little bit late? You were here in the beginning, so you did hear. It is based on the Gestalt empty chair therapy, by the way. It is. Okay, so demon, traces back to the Greek word daemon. Daemonia, right. And so daemon, in Greek understanding and thought, was not a devil, but was your spirit guide. It was something we each were born with. We were given this spirit guide. And by the way, in Roman, Italian and Roman culture, the direct translation of daemon is genius. Genius. So that's also an interesting thing, because what we're doing is we're befriending these aspects of ourselves, these fragmented aspects of ourselves, so that we can uncover the inner knowing, the inner guide, the genius, the daemon, or the ally. And so what I learned from my teacher and through some further reading and studies is that somewhere along the way, when Christianity began to become more established and institutionalized, the church was threatened by this idea of individuals having their own little gods, their own little daemon, because it was their way of, the daemon would be their connection to divinity, to intuition, the spirit guide. And the church didn't want that because they wanted people to go to the priest in order to go to God. And so they vilified the daemon into a demon and made it like a devil. And so in a way, this practice is reclaiming the original meaning of demon.
Hi there. Thank you. My question is around, I read the Tibetan book of Living and Dying.
Yes.
In this book, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but the authors, he goes through the death of his teacher, master,
yeah.
And he comes back to life after like 7 days or whatever. Then he announces he's going to die. He's really going to die this time. And he does. And then he goes into this description about the bardos, and he insinuates or expresses concern is more the concept. He expresses concern about how the West deal with their dead, how we burn our bodies up, we bury them way too fast. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
First of all, that's a beautiful book. I love that book, but it's been a long time since I've read it. So I don't remember that, but, I'm not a specialist in the phases of dying, but in terms of like how many days and this and that, but I'll share what I do know. So I do think it's true that if we can avoid moving the body for at least 24 hours, that's what I've learned from my teachers. That's a good thing. Within reason though, of course. If it's a colder climate, drier climate, maybe you could even not move it a little bit longer. Because it's said that the body dies in stages, from the elemental understanding. We talked about how the body is comprised of the 5 elements, right? So, some say the 4 elements, but the 5th is space. So, the body decays in stages, and the subtle consciousness, the pranic body, and then the mind and consciousness kind of shut down in stages. So if we can avoid moving it or burning it too fast, it is a good thing. It goes from the earth element to the water element, to the fire element, to the air element, to the space element. And so it's during those times that the Tibetans read this Tibetan Book of the Dead, or the Bardo Tudral, which means the liberation upon hearing in the Bardo. It actually does not mean the Tibetan Book of the Dead at all, but the early translators who wanted to popularize it thought, oh, this would be a good book to call the Tibetan Book of the Dead, to kind of ride on the coattails of the Egyptian Book of the Dead that's so popular. But it's called Liberation Upon Hearing in the Bardo, and it's literally a book that you have read to you or you read to others who are dying, moving through the Bardo, dying those first days of the Bardo. And so that they can hear it. They're still in the body, but you could also keep reading it after they've been cremated or buried, because what is said is that the spirit, the continuum of consciousness is like the subtle body or the subtle mind body that can no longer reside in the physical body anymore because it broke down, right? The heart's not beating anymore. It can't support the mind anymore. So then it leaves the body and it wanders through the Bardo for 7 weeks. So 49 days. And so they're reading this Tibetan Book of the Dead, we'll call it, for that length of time, throughout that whole time, even though long ago that the body was cremated or buried. Or in Tibet, you would have the sky burial, which is pretty far out. They didn't have a lot of wood in the high altitude of Tibet, so they would cut up the body and offer it up in high mountain passes on like a big stone table for the vultures to come and pick the bones clean. It's actually not that different than the Zoroastrian sky burial. It's different, but interesting. So, it's said that every 7 days the spirit loops back closer to earth. And so especially on every 7 days from the day the person dies, and 7 days later, then 14 days later, then 21 days later, and so on for 7 weeks, it's every 7-day mark. It's a good time to really light more incense, light more candles, say more prayers, read that book or other prayers that they liked, maybe other books, spiritual books that they liked, and to help encourage that being to let go of their attachments onto this plane and go towards the clear light. Because what that book is teaching us is to move towards and unify our consciousness with the clear light nature of mind, which is our true essential nature. So yes, go towards the light. When in doubt, go towards the light. And so that's every 7 days. And then after the 49th day, then it's said that the Bardo journey is, in that sense, this immediate Bardo journey is complete. And so those prayers don't need to be done any longer. There's really cool, Tara Mandala has some really wonderful resources for end-of-life spiritual care directives. We have booklets. We have teachers who have made this their passion and their calling to help people get ready for this latter phase in our life and make sure everything's the way we want it to be and set up so that our body is treated the way we want it to be treated. That'd be good for all of us to do it, no matter what stage we are in our life. So taramandala.org, and you could look up, end-of-life care or spiritual directive. There's some good resources there. I hope that's helpful. Yeah. If we cannot move the body, let's say for, as many hours as possible, but at least 24 hours, it's nice. And if that wasn't possible and it's already done, that's okay. Don't worry. Just keep praying and sending prayers and encouragement for that being to let go and to move towards the light.
Thanks so much for listening to Voices of Esalen. Today's show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme was composed by Nico Holloman. Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Until next time, be well.